Hello, welcome. My name is Monica Miller, and I am the Marketing and Publishing Coordinator of Caitlin Press. And we're very excited for you to join us here at the launch of Finding Heartstone by Cathy Sosnowsky. Caitlin Press is an independent Canadian publisher located on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia. We publish culturally significant books, including fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And we're also home to Dagger Editions, which is an imprint for the voices of queer women-identifying writers. I'd like to acknowledge that Caitlin Press receives support from the Government of Canada and the British Columbia Arts Council as a small independent publisher, and especially during these COVID times, it makes all the difference. So although we're joining you virtually and you may be anywhere else in the world, I would like to acknowledge that this does take place in Canada on the land of Indigenous peoples. Caitlin Press itself is located in Half Moon Bay, which is the traditional territories of the Squamish, Seashelt, Sliamon, and Klahoose First Nations. Myself, I work remotely in Vancouver, as well as Gordon Thomas, our host, joins us from Vancouver, which is the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And Cathy will recognize where she's from as well. We'd love to hear where you're joining us from. Let us know in the chat. If you're joining Crowdcast in a browser on a computer, you've got the chat function on the side. If you're in a mobile app, I believe you swipe up. So if you don't like the chat and you find it distracting, you can hide it. If you're on a desktop, you can hover over it, and in the top left-hand corner, there's a little arrow button, and you can just make it disappear. Some other housekeeping is there is a function down on the bottom to ask a question. You can ask a question in the chat, and I can make sure it comes into the Q&A, and we'll get to these audience questions at the end of the discussion that Gordon and Cathy are going to have. Also, check out the questions that other people have posted. You can upvote, and so we'll know that, you know, if something's been voted up a bunch of times, that it's a burning question and we really need to get Cathy to answer it. And of course, we'd love you to buy the book. There is a link down on the bottom of your screen that says buy the book. That goes to the Caitlin Press website. So if you just want to read about the book or see some more information, that's a great place to go. We also always encourage you to support your independent bookseller. They're the lifeblood of publishing and a real pillar of the community. I believe Cathy's local bookstore would be 32 Books in North Van. Here in Vancouver, I love supporting Iron Dog Books and Massey Books. And if you don't know what your local bookseller is, or if you need help finding it, ask in the chat, and I'll be there all evening helping out. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Cathy Sosnowsky and our host, Gordon Thomas. After teaching poetry as a college instructor for many years, Cathy Sosnowsky turned to writing for solace after the loss of her 3 children. Cathy's writing has also appeared in the Vancouver Sun, the Globe and Mail, the Georgia Straight, and Pacific Yachting. She's previously published a poetry collection called Holding On, Poems for Alex, and a memoir, Snapshots, A Story of Love, Loss, and Life. Cathy's presented about grief and writing worldwide. She has conducted writing workshops and is the chapter leader and newsletter editor of the North Shore Compassionate Friends of Parents Bereavement Group. Gordon Thomas, our host for the evening, he has worked in the publishing industry for more than 30 years as an editor, marketing sales director, agent, and consultant. He's worked for the University of Minnesota Press, Grey Wolf Press, Hazelden Publishing, the New Press, Granville Island Publishing, and more recently, Changemaker Books. Now, as principal of Gordon Thomas Publishing and Communication, he specializes in customized services for individual authors, including manuscript evaluation, editing, and preparing proposals. It was working for Granville Island Publishing that he met Cathy as he edited her book Snapshots, and they later became fast friends. But before we get to Cathy and Gordon, first, we have some special musical guests.
Oh,
Thank you.
so beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you. That trio of musicians, it's my brother-in-law, Vic Sosnowsky, master builder of Heartstone, on the fiddle. And behind him is Gord Lafleur, who drew the cover picture of Heartstone. Thank you so much, Gordon. And this is the first time I've met Tom Neville there on guitar. Thank you so much. The two pieces they played were Mist-Covered Mountains and Crossing to Ireland. Vic said about Mist-Covered Mountains, he chose this because for me it evokes Emily Carr type images, which are so much of my Heming Bay experience. And for Crossing to Ireland, the second piece, love the bittersweetness of this tune. Speaks of the Irish navies who had to go back to their homeland once a year for 2 weeks, knowing they'll be back digging the canals for the Brits before they know it. A metaphor for our lives in many ways. Well, Vic's very poetic besides a fiddle player and a master builder. Hey, Vic. Yeah. Gordon is going to be interviewing me, but before we start, I want to confess that I've never talked to 121 people at once before. I hope you're really out there. And I've just been enjoying the little comments at the side. I'm quite distracted. I'm speaking to you from my desk in North Vancouver, which is on the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish First Nations. And I wanted to just say, how is it that I got 100 plus people to come to my launch? Well, my poetry group signed up. Hi, Ray. I'm just going to mention one person from each group. My church faith study group signed up. Hi, Corrine. My compassionate friend signed up. Hi, Pierre-André. people who once taught with Waldy signed up. Hi, Linda. Cousins of Waldy. Hi, Marion. Hi, Jude. The original founders of the Hemming Bay Committee signed up, and Sue and Bob are having trouble getting on, I understand, but we'll be in touch. Young men who as teenagers came to Hemming Bay to help clear the site for Heartstone. They're there, Johnny, and people who taught with me at Langara. Hi, Roger. And pretty well everybody I know I invited. So stop people on the street saying, hey, would you like to come to a book launch? That's about enough for me. Gordon, do you want to ask me a question?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to host an interview tonight, Cathy. It's a real pleasure. And also, I'd like to echo my thanks for all of you who are here as well, because I can see in the chat bar that we have a lot of people, and a couple sentiments, more than a couple, are saying many people love you. So it's very nice to be with you all. So, one of the first questions is, let's start with a picture. So there's a very sweet picture in the book of your writing room at Heartstone, a picture of the desk with a window above it. And you started to write the book, I believe, there. Was it your intention to write specifically about the builders themselves, the experience? What was your initial concept of how this would evolve?
Well, it was so astounding to be given this little desk under a window in a house that took over 20 years to build, handmade in the wilderness with many, many challenges. So both Waldy and Vic, Waldy's my husband, Vic's my brother-in-law, and they're the two central builders, of course. And they said, sit down and write. So I immediately got writer's block, but I remembered I tell writers, I give workshops on writing, and I say, well, if you can't write, just write about whatever's around you. What was around me was this building and, of course, the builders. And behind that is the whole community of Hemming Bay, which was founded 43 years ago as a wilderness cooperative. So I thought, I'll write all about that. Yes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I know from personal experience that construction logistics are often challenging on an island location, let alone an island, well, the island where you were, which is quite far away. How long did the construction take? How many years to build Heartstone?
Over 20, I can say, because you could start using it before it was completely finished. And of course, according to Vic and Waldy, it's still not completely finished because they need to buy, not buy, they don't buy anything. They build, oh darn, for the generator, a generator shack. And they have to look after the hydroelectric power, and also because it's been there for a while, things are rotting, they have to be replaced. It's a continual workplace for the brothers who love to work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's located on East Thurlow Island. And could you give us just a conception of where that is exactly in relation to the Sunshine Coast and up the coast?
Well, most people know where Campbell River is, so we could start with that. Yeah. We used to, when we had a nice boat, Waldy and I used to get to Hemming Bay by boat. It would take us 2 days. It wasn't a speedboat. It was a motor sailor. 4 knots was our usual speed. And it was a lovely trip. But now we don't have that boat. So we get on the ferry at Horseshoe Bay. We go to Nanaimo. We drive to Campbell River. We drive another hour past Campbell River. We drive along Rock Bay Road, which is a logging road, to get to Rock Bay, where we moor our, what we call our transport boat, a little speedboat. Another 20 minutes and we get over to the island. And sometimes there's fog, and sometimes on Johnson Strait it's very rough. So it's sometimes a challenge.
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of us who are listening from BC understand what it's like getting to any Gulf island, but let alone that's definitely a trip that you don't make every weekend necessarily. So I'm just curious. I know I'm quite familiar with who built the house. Were you part of the building crew yourself at any point?
No. It's a men's place, really. I mean, I know there are women that build. Kate Braid has just had a new book launch. She's a poet and a builder, a construction worker, but I didn't have the knack for it. So the only time I was part of the crew was when I'd stay on her boat and make sandwiches and row ashore, thinking that lunchtime was about noon. And they would just keep working. Maybe at 2:00 they'd stop for sandwiches. The boys that came and worked on the crew, part of the whole building of Heartstone was it was a tribute to our son who died, Alex, who loved Hemingway and was there since he was 3 years old. After he died, his friends, as 18-year-olds, came up that summer to help build the site, clear the site. And their initials are in the footing. And I hope they're out there, Joff and Johnny, today. Yeah. Now they're young men with families.
Yeah. Well, along the way, a simple renovation project can cause friction between any spouses. So a lot, in the process of building, did this cause friction with you and Woldy, or how did you get along through all of it?
Well, yes, there was a lot of waiting involved. I had likened myself to Penelope, who waited 10 years for her husband Odysseus to get home from the Trojan War. So he would go away and he'd be very happy there working. I was at home writing. As I said, the construction only started after our son's death, and I turned to writing. But it was expensive and it was lonely. So yeah, there were quarrels. Yeah.
Yeah, and you just mentioned, Monica mentioned that I worked with you a long time ago on Snapshots, which was a lovely book about your family and about Alex. You just mentioned Alex. You shared with me that for Woldy, the building of Heartstone brought him closer to Alex, to your son. Can you talk about that a little bit with us?
Yeah, as I said, they often, when parents lose a child, they grieve differently, men and women. So building Heartstone with his brother and Alex's friends was a way of healing for Waldy. I was writing out my grief. But when he would come home, he would sometimes, he would tell me stories about what happened when he was away. And one of them was about a raven talking to him, who seemed to be Alex. So that poem is in the book. I'd like to read it now. It involves sounding like a raven. So, of course, I turned to Mr. Google and looked up, what does a raven sound like? A raven has 33 different calls, and some can even be taught to speak if you tame them. So you'll just have to accept my version of a raven's call. Hope that it's 33. So this is a poem I wrote after Alex told me, Waldy told me about feeling close to Alex. It's called Raven Talks to Waldy. Smelling of musk oil and sweat, he swings the pick into the rock-bound earth, alone. The forest echoes. But wait, there's someone talking, someone squawking. Right on, Dad. Squawk, squawk. Keep swinging, Dad. Squawk, squawk. I'm watching, Dad. Squawk, squawk. Black wings shining, Dad. Squawk, squawk. Watch me flying, Dad. I'm just going to read the paragraph that comes after that poem in the book. Waldy always came home from the wilderness, radiating exuberance and smelling of diesel oil, musk, wood smoke, and cedar. As he stepped through the door, he reminded me of Alex coming in from his first full day of whitewater kayaking, smelling of water and sunshine, glowing and saying, "I've just had the best day of my life." In both cases, I thought, without me. Yeah.
Yeah, that's such a lovely excerpt and a beautiful and touching poem, Cathy. I've always been such a fan of your poetry and your voice. And what other poems are in the book? Can you tell us a little bit about other poetry in Heartstone?
Not many of my poems. Another one called Osprey was prompted by Alex's drawing of an osprey's nest in Hemming Bay. And in his journal, he wrote under the drawing, "It was the best part, seeing the osprey with its young." And as a little boy, and that's in the book, because the book begins with us visiting when he was only 3 years old. He wanted to be an ornithologist, he said. So there's a great association with Alex and birds. Yeah. A poem that is in the book, not mine, Yeats, and only the first verse, comes when we were visiting Serenity Isle, which is an island in the middle of the lake, Hemming Lake, and a hermit lived there, Ron. We got to know him very well. And when I visited him the idea of living on an island, on a lake, on an island, now there is escaping from the world. I just thought of Yeats. I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. So that poem's in the book too, thanks. Yeats is dead, he can't sue me.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's the poetry is a part of the book, and one of the interesting constructions of the narrative for me is the counterpoint of the poetry and some recipes that you include, and in a very interesting way. Can you tell us a bit about how you decided to include them and what they meant to you in the evolution of Heartstone?
Well, it's strange. When I started writing the book, I told the first story of arriving there with the cooperative members in 1978, and there's nothing there. It's wilderness. Well, yeah, there's animals, there's birds, there's trees. And getting together, Waldy and I arrived on our boat with our young son, Alex. Getting together at night, I found myself being very shy of, they were Americans. We got a lot of American listeners here that are still part of the community. And what kind of saved me from feeling apart from them was when Alex and I explored the beach and found limpets. Limpets are they're also called Chinese hats. They're little cone-like creatures, snails under rocks. And you can just get them off with your kitchen knife. And so writing the first chapter, I included the recipe for what I called limpets escargot. Alex, even as a little boy, liked escargot. So an example of a recipe I'm reading from the book. Let the limpets sit in the seawater for an hour or so to cleanse themselves of sand. Boil them in a little water until they are loose from their shells. Throw the shells back into the sea. Fry the little morsels in butter and finely chopped garlic. Serve on crackers. Yeah, nice. And I kept that up because I thought I needed a format for the book, that every chapter had a recipe that came out of the narrative. But then once Alex died in a sudden accident, And we'd lost, shortly after that, lost our 2 adopted children to the life of the streets. I was in such a depression, I wasn't caring about food, the community entanglement. So there's a chapter called Writing for Survival, and really writing was my recipe for survival. The next chapter is called Building for Survival, and building was Waldy's recipe for survival. So those chapters don't have recipes, eating recipes in them, food recipes.
Food recipes, but recipes for healing, we might say. Okay? Something that helped you move through together.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get to the name itself. Can you tell us how the place came to be called Heartstone?
Yeah. John and Julie are down there in the Seattle area listening to this. They're boaters. They weren't member of the community. And it's a very nice anchorage, very safe anchorage, Hemming Bay. So they were anchored there and they heard all this noise. Part of the Hemming Bay community rules is that if you were going to build, you would build 50 feet back from the shore and leave trees. So you only see wilderness. So they were curious and came in their rowboat and up the path and found Vic and Waldy and their crew of young people busy working, and they just joined in. Then had them back that night for spaghetti on their boat, and we've remained friends, good friends since. They collected heartstones. So when they knew Waldy and Vic were building heart-shaped stones, building a fireplace from big stones collected around the area, they left at the entrance path a big heartstone. It's the center of the fireplace. So literally, there is a heart-shaped stone at the floor-to-ceiling fireplace. But it may seem a strange name for something that gives sanctuary and solace, because we have that phrase, he has a heart as cold as stone. But the way I look at the stone is that it's something solid, something unchanging, something safe. So that's where Heartstone comes from, yeah.
That's where Heartstone comes from, and also the title Finding Heartstone, which I think you just articulated very beautifully. So this was a place of solid ground for you, not only figuratively, but literally as well. You know, to many of, especially in this time of COVID, to many of us, living in a place like Heartstone year-round seems like it would be nirvana right now, to be disconnected. What are the realities of that, and what would it entail, however, to really be there all the time?
Well, there is the bounty of the sea, clams, crabs, salmon, but there's no grocery store. You run out, you can make your own bread, I guess. I don't. But if you run out of anything, it's a big trip to Campbell River to replenish. Okay, Waldy and Vic, they bring in a week's supply at a time, and then they go out and get it again. So you could do that if you lived there, I guess, but no coffee shops, no libraries, no tennis courts, no neighbors. It's an isolated place.
Right.
It's wonderful to be there as an escape, but I wouldn't be tough enough to live there. I think Waldy and Vic probably would, but they still have wives at home, you know.
Sure.
Are you listening?
Are they out there?
Yeah.
Well, and we know it was originally designed as a cooperative of sorts, and you say there are no neighbors there now, or very few. How many actually built?
Just 4, including ourselves, yeah. And they're tucked away. People can't see these places unless they know how to find them. On the other hand, there is a community lodge, a large place that there's 20 shareholders. So members who haven't built their own place can stay in the community lodge. And we do have a caretaker that stays there year round. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, so we've touched on several important elements of the book and parts you've talked about the grief process, cooking catches from the sea, the perseverance in a marriage, and so forth. What else will people discover as they read this book?
Well, our granddaughter appears and gives a very light touch. She and 2 grandchildren from other founding members are singing Dumb Ways to Die. Adults don't seem to like that song, but children sure do. I didn't intend to read or sing from Dumb Ways to Die, but it's take your toast out with a fork, use your private parts for piranha bait, dumb ways to die, so many dumb ways to die. And when the children are singing this, I think I've found it now, listening to them are Waldy and I, whose son died in a dumb way, you could say. Alex and his friend climbed a tennis bubble at night, and Alex was standing on a seam that split, fell. That was it. He died from a head injury before he got to the hospital. But also with us was Bob and Sue Sampson, whose son died from, I think it's called paragliding. His parachute failed.
Right.
Another dumb way to die. But there we are in the wilderness setting with these 3 children joyfully singing. Children think they're immortal, right? Singing this song, and we're laughing away. So, yeah.
Cathy, in the preface, you borrow a phrase from the novelist Jim Shepard, in which you term this book a redemptive narrative, both self-condemning and self-exonerating. Can you explain to those listening what you mean by that?
Well, the self-condemning, I think I've already touched on that. I really felt like a wimp not being able to help in the construction. And then, who likes a whining woman? I'm whining at home. Why are you away? There was no telephone. So if Waldy's away for a week, I couldn't get in touch with him. He didn't get in touch with me. Think of those wives that lived through the wars. Anyway, so also, we lost our 3 children. Now, how could you lose 3 children? It's not. I don't go into it in detail, but I'm part of the Compassionate Friends group, supportive group for bereaved parents. And no matter how a child dies, all 3 children didn't die, just Alex, but our 2 adopted children did leave us for a time. So there's always guilt involved in that. So that's the self-condemning, but self-exonerating. I waited for that desk, right? I hung on in. And also a wonderful part of the book is that our son Michael, who was away for a long time, spent some of those years in a prison in China, came back to us. So it was like a rebirth for all of us, and that's in the last chapter. Yeah. Right.
There's so much in this book, and there's so many different threads of life. One thing before we get to a couple final questions from me, and then we'll open it up to all the people listening. I'd like to talk about the subtitle a little bit, because a subtitle, as you know, is often as impactful as the title. Title is wonderful. And how did you come to arrive and land at the subtitle? And there's a slight twist of the word there, taste of and taste for.
Yeah. Well, it is, the subtitle is A Taste of Wilderness. And I say in my preface that if Vic and Waldy had written the book, they're too busy to write a book, but if they'd written the book, it would have been A Taste for Wilderness, because they just love it. Vic calls it God's country, and Waldy's always restless to get back there. Yeah. So because I just nibbled at, I had illusions of the wilderness from National Geographic and from reading books like Call of the Wild as a child. But really, I wasn't gung-ho embracing it. So it's a taste of wilderness.
Right.
Also, when our grief engulfed us, that was a wilderness.
Right.
A taste
Correct.
of the wilderness
Right.
of grief. And then there were the recipes that come from, not all of them, but most of them are from the sea life around us. Yeah.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I hadn't mentioned to you about this before when we talked a little bit about the evening tonight, but and I don't know if you want to reveal this or not, because it's one of my favorite snippets of your language, which is the closing couple paragraphs of the book and your conclusion. It's just beautifully written. Now, maybe we should wait and have everybody have that be a surprise, or you could read a little bit. What do you think?
We're at 7:40, are we? My watch
Yeah,
stopped working, but I can see on my computer at
Yeah.
7:40.
Yeah.
I was going to.
Oh, go ahead. Yes.
You were asking me to read the last two things, but I was going to read a description of Heartstone. I've got it in the chapter where Michael comes back, the last chapter, and it's me looking at Heartstone through Michael seeing it for the first time. Viewed from the trail, Heartstone seems to float on a sea of ferns. On either side and behind, the building is embraced by tall firs and cedars. Its cedar shake and board and batten exterior blend in, as if part of nature itself. Sitting on the deck that circles the house, weathered wooden chairs wait for visitors. Above them hangs a large copper gas lamp, once a decoration of an English pub, the Railway Tavern, now bearing the words Heartstone Lodge. Michael paused. I thought it was because of the difficulty of navigating an uphill rocky dirt path on crutches. But no, he was just looking and repeating, wow, wow, wow. I didn't mention that when Michael came back from China, his back was severely damaged, so he had an operation and had to use crutches. Nevertheless, his father insisted that we go to Heming Bay the week after he arrived.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's a lovely excerpt and one of so many in this book. And so when you do read the book, everyone, many tidbits, and the closing is absolutely wonderful as well. So thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add, Cathy, before we go to some questions from people?
Oh, it's 7:42. I hope I can do this quickly. When I actually got the book last week, and that's when we had the accident on the highway, I could read it as a reader instead of working on the manuscript and working on, word choice and punctuation. And what I realized going through it again is it's a book produced by a community. I wrote it, but I'm telling other people's stories. So I'm going to have to read this in case I forget something. There's an excerpt of Vic actually writing about an ingenious repair of a broken fuel filter. I retell the story told by Bob Sanson of kayaking across the Bering Strait. I recall Waldy's vision of Alex as a stag on the Heming Bay beach. I retell Arno's story of the cougar attack on his wife. I retell my sister-in-law's visit from a healing raven. I recall my son's story of his years in Chinese prison. So although my own attitude to the wilderness and my dealing with my grief is a main thread through the book, I just feel it's a community book, and I wanted to thank everybody for telling me their stories and letting me retell them. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I guess we're ready for some questions.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Gordon. I really appreciate, and I
you're
really
welcome.
enjoyed the discussion you guys had.
Oh, thank you.
And I will field some audience questions now. So, Cathy, there's a question here from Roger Holdstock that you may not want to answer, and I understand if you don't. He asks, do you want to say a bit about how Michael was lost and then found again?
Well, I have mentioned our son leaving. Michael was adopted at age 6, and he had a very troubled youth. Troubled youth. He wasn't treated well as a child. And we, as I said, we adopted him at 6, but by the age 14, he became addicted to drugs and lived on the street culture that was very popular for youth in Vancouver in those years. But we stayed in touch with him mostly. He went to China to teach ESL, and we visited him there. And then, unfortunately, his drug habit overtook him, and he spent 8 years in a Chinese jail. He survived it very well, very well. Yeah. He did university courses by hand, no research available, and did very well and came home to us. And he's a blessing to us now. There's an epilogue that talks about what he's doing now. He is working with high-risk youth on the Surrey anti-gang team. And he's also working with the Portland Housing Society and saving people from overdoses at night. So it's fantastic. A very happy ending story. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Reading those passages, I was really touching to see you include, how Michael came back and
he came back for Hemming Bay fish and chips. The book ends with fish and chips.
Yeah. Yeah. So your recipes got me craving. Emily asks, when can we get our copies signed?
Oh.
So you'll probably want to reach out to some people and coordinate some masked up, hand sanitized signings. But that made me think, like, what do you hope readers will get out of or connect with your book? You mentioned community, but is there anything else that you'd like readers to connect with?
The long process of healing from loss. And I think that the call of the wild, the idea of returning to nature, is a feeling we all have on the pavements gray, as Yeats called them. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, it definitely made me want to go huddle up in a little cabin in the woods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just
as for signing the books, I think you mentioned that we could set up time maybe with 32 books in Edgemont.
Yes, I didn't want to promise anything because we haven't got details confirmed, but I am looking to hopefully do that. So fingers crossed we can get that confirmed, and I'm sure Cathy will let all of her friends and family here and know when that's available. So yeah, it's different in the time of COVID, definitely, but there are workarounds, and we're so thankful for the audience for supporting us. We've got a question here from Richard Walton. What changes have you noticed in Hemming Bay over 40 years? Wow, 40 years.
Yeah, really, it hasn't changed much. As I said, there's 40 individual dwellings, but they're hidden in the woods. Yeah, it's still a wilderness. I mean, it's a real tribute to the founders of the community, and some have died, some have sold, and there's newcomers, but the newcomers come with the same beliefs and ideals of that it's worth preserving the wilderness as is. Even Arno and Jenny was attacked by a cougar there.
Oh my gosh.
Still comes back. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cynthia Flood asks, what are you going to write next, Cathy?
Oh, Cynthia. Cynthia's a writer. Yeah. And she's a hard-working writer. I really admire her. But my poetry group, we're going to put, it's going to be a cooperative book. We're going to put through together sort of a how-to book to do poetry group. and have fun. And it's not a poetry group where we really say, is this really a sonnet, and scan the lines or anything. We write around themes once a month, and we read the poems that we've written, and we respond to them in a general way. So that is a book that I'm looking forward to working on.
Sounds great. Mark Bruler asks, how did you find out about Hemming Bay in the first place?
Oh, gosh. Now, it was Vic, the fiddler, the master builder, who was going to school in Aberdeen, I think, Washington. And it was a friend from there. It was Americans that bought the property as the cooperative. We were the token Canadians at that time. But yeah, and it's 232 acres. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Of wilderness, and it edged on the sea, of course, and also on the lake.
And you mentioned a little bit. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's okay.
Oh, you mentioned that it's a cooperative and like people have this similar values, and I was just wondering if you could say a little more about that.
Well, I've read some books about utopia communities or cooperatives on the coast, and they usually fall apart because of infighting or some kind of discouragement. So they have their annual general meeting, people socialize in the summer, and we get along. It's wonderful. Yeah.
And the wilderness protection, you mentioned there's some provisions for that.
Yeah, and there's a salmon enhancement program there in the creek.
Oh, fantastic.
Too. Yeah, yeah. Dolphins come into the bay at night. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds pretty idyllic.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I noticed in the chat that someone from the US said, how can we get books? And Caitlin doesn't have the distributing rights yet.
We do. So our books are distributed in the US after the Canadian books. It has to do with a lot of industry things. So the book will be available in the US in March.
Oh, but if they're in a hurry, they could write me and I will send them a book. Yeah, I got some author copies. And these are mainly people that are members of our community. Yeah.
Yes, that is a sneaky workaround. Yes. So it looks like a family member, Joannie, has asked, might there be another book by Sosnowsky? Michael's story is truly amazing and inspiring. Maybe with some help from his mom. So impressed with how you've turned your life around, Michael. Yeah. Love, Joannie. Yeah.
Oh, Joannie, thank you for that. Thank you for that. She's like a member of the family, and she's been to Hemming Bay. Michael is very expressive, and I'm wanting him to write his own book. And yes, of course, I'd be willing to edit it. Yes. And it'll be more interesting than mine. He's been through a lot. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you saying how much writing has helped you. I mean, even if it's not something he wants to publish, it sounds like writing for you really, really helped change you. So for one final question, you said it's a redemptive narrative, and what did you learn about yourself during the process of writing your book?
Well, I guess going back to that quote from Jim Shepard, that a personal narrative is always both self-condemning and self-exonerating, both. But I didn't like the whiner in me, the wimp in me, but I guess you could say I'm proud of myself for hanging on in. The marriage was shaky at times. Over child loss, that often happens. Yeah. Well, he's a good guy. He's in the other room listening. I thought I should put in a few words for him. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for answering all these audience questions and chatting with Gordon. I want to thank everyone who joined us. And of course, Gordon and the musicians, yourself, Cathy, thank you so much. And I know you have some final thank yous before we have a final farewell. So I will let you take it away.
Well, I want to thank everyone, and I feel my life is very full. When we were in that head-on car collision just 13 days ago, I really did think I was going to cross over to the other side, but I'm glad to be here participating. I didn't tell the part of the story that the ambulance medic who first started helping me was named Alex, so Alex was hanging on in there with me. Vic and his group are going to play the Sky Boat song. Is it Fly Bonny Boat, Fly Bonny Boat, like a bird on the wing over the sea to sky, carry the lad who's born to be king. Yeah. I asked Vic to play that because it seems to me it embodies again that wish to escape to an island that has a historical context, of course, but it has that feeling of, and a bonny boat is a good thing to have, eh, Vic? Thank you.
Can we do it?
Let's go.